Welcome to the talk today. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Punith Kempegowda. I hope I said it right. Dr. Kempegowda is an assistant professor at the University of Birmingham, and as well as a consultant in endocrinology. So we're really glad he decided to come visit us. We've been working with him on a DKA project, but his overall research interest is to provide evidence-based care and how to implement the best guidelines. So he leads a multi-center cloud-based program that is DEKODE, and he also leads his kind of quality initiatives are in other fields as well, such as PCOS. So today he'll talk about the DEKODE DKA program. And it's, as far as I know, it's an international collaboration. So he'll talk about that and so far what's been going on. He'll also be at the ADA. So, and I know some of you will be meeting him here. So I hope there'll be lots of collaboration in the future. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for the kind introduction here. Thank you for the invitation to come and talk to you guys. Here's the layout of my presentation. We'll start off by sharing my outlook to the giants who've been in this field, who've been changing the way inpatient diabetes has been managed. Then we'll talk about taking the next step, standing on the shoulders of these giants and taking the next step. And I'll be talking about DEI, and I'm not referring to diversity, equality, and inclusivity. It is important, but there's another DEI which is part of implementation science, and that's what I'll be talking about today. Then I'll discuss a case study of our work that we've been doing with DEKODE. And very, very, very briefly, and I use three times because it's a topic by itself, talk about SIMBA and CoMICs, and lastly, how nurses, medical students, and junior doctors are involved in this project. I stole this slide from Guillermo, so I thank him for sending the slide, but I've added two more people to this. The story of DKA starts way back with Banting and Press when they invented insulin. Then George Alberti and Abbas Kitachi have been influential in changing how acute diabetes and particularly hypoglycemic crisis have been managed in the US and worldwide. In the last 3-4 decades, we've had Guillermo and Ketan take lead on this, and very recently they have managed to change or come up with a consensus report on how hypoglycemic crisis should be managed worldwide as a first joint collaboration guidelines between ADA, EASD, JPDS, which is UK-based, ACE, which is American-based, and the Diabetes Technology Society. So that's great. So we've now got a kind of a consensus statement and a guideline. So where do we go next? We need to now start thinking of DEI. So what is DEI? DEI stands for dissemination, education, and implementation. So guidelines are essential to manage or to standardize practice and to minimize variation in care. But then there's the guidelines, and then now we need to make it into reality. And that's where DEI comes into play. Often, unfortunately, it's underutilized. It's not the guidelines are not disseminated as well as it could be. Education is not provided as well as it could be. And implementation is limited. Various factors, and I'll come about those things in a moment. And this leads to inconsistent application of guidelines. And most importantly, what it does is it's causing differential care offered to the patient. It could be because it could be across region. Some patients might get a good care in Atlanta compared to elsewhere. It might be across gender, or it could be across race, so on and so on. In the next 3 slides, I'll talk briefly about what dissemination, education, and implementations. Dissemination basically stands for we need to distribute these guidelines to intended audience. The intended audience are people who use the guidelines. Now, this is where this guideline is very unique compared to other diabetes guidelines. This guidelines is not technically written for diabetes and endocrine consultants. This is more so written for those emergency physicians, those acute care physicians, the hospitalists, the nurses, the junior doctors, the residents, the interns, and the medical students who are involved in providing the care at an emergency setting. So we need to reach them. Often, the most common way of disseminating the guideline is conferences. Now, this would work if we have the targeted audience inside the conference hall. Most of the conferences are diabetes and endocrine. We don't have emergency physicians sitting there. We don't have critical care physicians sitting there. We don't have nurses sitting there. So that brings up to the whole aspect of challenges. There's the accessibility issues, which may not be a big issue from what I've heard from Guillermo and Ketan. Guidelines will be made available freely, downloadable worldwide. But then the awareness, I can't see what the mind doesn't know. If people don't know there's a guideline out there, they won't access it. So we need to now come up with what's the solution. We need to come up with user-friendly formats. And that's important because I remember when we started this project back in 2014, we had a 20-page guideline, and often DKA was not manageable. When we went down to the emergency department and asked somebody, why are we having trouble managing DKA even though we have guidelines? Well, when I have a patient with a DKA, it's not the only patient. It'll be an emergency room with 10 serious patients. One would be having a stroke, another one would have an accident. Your patient is one of them. I don't have time to look through 20 pages to figure out what I need to do. We need something simple, straightforward. I don't need to know why, I just need to know what I should do at that point in time. So that's one of the things, that was one of the messages. And that has translated in the international guidelines recently, where they have now got a one-page guideline. Still can be made simpler, and I'll talk about those in a moment. So the whole idea is we need to now make it user-friendly. And the word user-friendly is important. This is where we need to start thinking of end user. So we need to think about who is using the guideline, whether the guideline is in the format they can use it. That's the most important thing. Next comes education. So you've now made them aware of the guidelines here. Now we need to educate them to understand exactly what is done in the guideline. And that's very important because they may be aware, and this is very often, we'll show you the data in a moment, but very often that they are aware of the guideline, but they don't know what exactly needs to be done. And what happens is this, we go and say, did you follow the guidelines? Yes, I have followed the guideline, but they are not aware of the revisions, and hence they would have stuck to what they have been taught in the medical school or early years in your career. How often we do it? We do it, the education mostly given as a webinar or training session, which is fine, but then the whole aspect of engagement comes into play. Are we engaging the emergency physicians? Are we engaging the nurses? Are we engaging the residents? Then comes the whole concept of comprehension. Is the guideline simple enough to understand? Is it in the format they can understand? Is it in the language they can understand? And that is important because most guidelines, at least to the best of my knowledge, are written in English, which is fine. But then latest census shows that 75% of the world cannot comprehend English. They can read it. Now reading is different, comprehension is different. So they can't comprehend it. Now, the world's most spoken language is Mandarin. That's one aspect. Now the second most spoken language is Spanish. And now we're writing the guidelines in English. Now there comes the next aspect, which is units. Which units do you use? Milligram per deciliter? Fine, you'll be able to approach about 40% of the world. Millimole per liter, you'll be able to approach another 30% of the world. There are countries which use both, there are countries which use something completely different. So this whole aspect comes into play. We then need to think about creating educational systems which are engaging to the crowd of that particular region and interactive, because there's no point in us sitting and giving a lecture about it. They listen to it, they'll say it's a great talk, they go home, they've forgotten about it. It's almost like going to a movie. You go to a movie, you'll enjoy the movie, but then if you ask somebody what was in the movie, then after a week, they're like, it was about something, I don't know what exactly it is. That's not how it should be. Education should be something where they will be able to apply the knowledge when they take it back with them. And last comes the implementation. So you now made them aware of the guideline, you've educated them how to use the guideline. Now you need to see whether they're using the guideline. And that's the whole aspect of how do we do this. It happens at multi-level. There's local, regional, and national and international levels. Locally, you need to start thinking about internationally, you need to come up with a policy, which we have now. Then we need to have action plans to bring this into practice, and that should happen at the national level because national organizations can guide through to various hospitals of their region how to do this, and then comes monitoring and evaluation. To the best of my knowledge, I don't think there is a system in place in US, and I might be wrong, where there is an ongoing monitoring of how DKAs are managed in the country, or how HHS is managing the country. And that's important, and I'll show you the data. Because if we don't see the trends, we continue to do the same thing and we're not picking up what is changing or what is different. So we need to come up with a culture of continuous improvement by having ongoing monitoring. So now comes the case study of DKA. a brief introduction about DKA. So it's a life-threatening condition. In the UK, we have over 35,000 unplanned admissions. 90% of them happen in people with no history of diabetes, because often they say DKA is usually a first presentation, so it is unavoidable. 10% fine, but 90% is avoidable and still happening. Costs over more than 100 million a year. I know UK system is, the US system is different to UK system, but in UK system it's all taxpayers' money. So every penny counts. And in our region, every hospital has a guideline. But then it's not resulted in meaningful improvement. If you're looking at audits, snapshots presented, it's still the same thing over and over. And in fact, we're now seeing longer hospital stays, more morbidity, and more deaths. And that's important because DKA was almost a death sentence before insulin was invented. When insulin came, it started decreasing. And until the turn of the century, it was less than 1%. But interestingly, latest evidence shows that the mortality has gone up by about 3 or 4%. So that's about 300 to 400 times increase in mortality associated with DKA. A condition which can be prevented, a condition which can be easily diagnosed, a condition which can be managed with the guideline, and people are dying. Why not? As I said, year on year, we're spending 10 more million, thousands more cases happening. We don't know why. We don't know why they're coming back and more and more happening. And then there's a whole concept of recurrent DKA, which I'm not going to talk about today. Variation here. Now, this is one of the topics I'm quite fascinated about. So I often compare this when I teach medical students, saying that guidelines is almost like a railway track with sleepers. It's designed to take a person from being unwell to well. The track is straight, the sleepers are laid properly, it's a smooth journey. Occasionally, some of the sleepers are missing, in which case, if we translate this, some of the aspects of the guidelines are not followed. It's still straight, the train has to go a little bit slower. Translated into medical terms, the DKA duration becomes longer. It translates into longer hospital stay. Now comes a slightly wonky track. Wonky as in like all the care was given, but it was not given as recommended by the guideline, the right timings, which means that the guidelines, which means the journey will become much more slower. It translates to much more DKA duration and longer length of stay. Now combine this with some of missed care. So care was not given at the right time, plus some of the care was not given. It's a recipe for disaster. Often people ask me, what's changed in DKA guidelines? The newest change is the take on 250. I don't know how many of you are aware. The new guidelines, which is due to be published very soon, says that when blood glucose reaches 250 milligram per deciliter or 14 millimole per liter in the UK standards, we need to reduce fixed rate by 50% and start them on 10% extras. Now, this is going to be new in America, but it's a common practice, or at least it's part of our guidelines in UK for 8 years now. Again, let's compare this to a train track. Things are going the right way. We've now hit a branch where the blood glucose has reached 14 or 250 milligram per deciliter. You follow the guidelines, reduce it by 50%, and start them on 10% dextrose. All's good, patient's fine, patient gets out of the hospital quickly. If you don't follow the guideline, either you continue the fixed rate at full rate, or not give the 10% dextrose, it results in hypoglycemia. Now again, combine that with missed monitoring, it's a recipe for death. How high is the death rate? It's 4 times high. Now remember, this is a patient who's come in with very high sugars. We've driven them down to normal and driven them down towards hypoglycemia and led them to death. Sounds uncommon. In our DEKODE database, we've seen about 6 cases in the last 12 months. 6 in the last 1 year who came in with high glucose and died because of hypoglycemia. Back to that. So this is where DEKODE comes into place. DEKODE stands for Digital Evaluation of Ketosis and Other Diabetes Emergencies. It's a very simple concept. So the whole idea is every month we give feedback to a hospital saying that, look, we didn't tell them what you were doing right or wrong. We just said, okay, this is our DKA duration in our hospital. This is the proportion of patients who are receiving the care as per the guidelines. We did not tell them what to change, how to change, or whatever it is. And what you see here is, I don't know if you can see your mouse, Yes, you can. Before we started, the median duration is about 20 plus hours, but more importantly is the huge variation. It was almost a lottery. A patient can come in and they might get lucky and they might find a team which knows exactly what they are doing. They come out of DKA within about 6 to 7 hours. Or they can be in the hospital with DKA for about 6 to 7 days. Huge variations. We started providing them feedback. All we did was every month we said, this is the median DKA duration, this is the median length of stay, this is the proportion of patients who receive the right fluids, insulin, glucose, and ketones. It started dropping to the point where the median DKA duration dropped to about 7 hours. That's a 2/3 reduction in DKA duration. But more importantly, every patient brought it up DKA within 24 hours. Reduced variation. That's the focus we had. We then said, okay, what happens if we stop giving this feedback? People have been given feedback for about a year and a half. They know exactly what to do. What happens if we stop giving feedback? So this was the next piece of work we did, where we stopped giving feedback. It was not a trial by design. It was just that I was in this hospital for this duration, and then for the next 2 years, as part of our rotation, we moved to another hospital. I came back in 2018 and redid the audit and said it starts to slowly drift back up. It's still not as bad as it was, but it starts to drift back up. And what it showed for us, a well done QI with the continuous can improve the care and can sustain the improvement for a short while. But if you stop giving the feedback, people start to lose focus and variation care starts to come up again. Concept of DEKODE is not that different from what we already practice. It's exactly the same of any audit that we would do. The only difference is every hospital want to do its own audit. They'll create their own pro forma, they'll create their own system, they'll create their own way of collecting the data. And this is how all the audits would look like. They're all the same color, i.e. they're all the same type of audit, but they're of different shapes and sizes, different parameters collected, different aspects collected. What we did was, rather than everybody doing their own thing, why don't we just all do the same thing? We just collect the data on the same aspect. This is the whole concept now. So we said, okay, we'll create an online form where you collect the data on patients who are admitted with DKA. You just give us the data. We will clean the data and we will analyze the data. And every 3 months, we will provide you with the feedback on key performance parameters. What are these key performance parameters? What was the proportion of patients who had appropriate care for insulin, fluid, glucose, and ketones as per the guidelines? As an example, if a person came in with DKA and they weighed 70 kilos, the guidelines is they should receive 0.1 units per kilo per hour of continuous insulin infusion. So that will be about 7 units. If they get 7 units, that's 100%. That's great. If they get 3.5 units, that's 50%. If they get 14, that's 200%. So that's the variation that we were looking at. We also provided feedback on what was the proportion of DKA episodes where there was hypoglycemia, hypokalemia, and hyperkalemia. Now, these are never events. We wanted to give them saying that we should be aiming for 0 here, and we provided them feedback. And lastly, the most important thing that every hospital in the UK is very interested in: how long is this person staying in this hospital? We gave them the feedback. We just gave them the feedback. We didn't tell them what you should do about it. What they started to do is they started to use that data, educate their doctors, their nurses, their HCPs to improve the care, and we continue the system through and through to keep on improving the care. This was started in Birmingham, not the one across a few miles from here, but across the pond in UK. And we then spread it out to our region, which would be similar to the Georgia region. And then we've now spread it across the whole of England, and soon we'll be spreading it across to the rest of the countries within the UK. Yeah, often people get confused when I say rest of the countries. The UK, it's a nation, and inside that there are 4 countries. Even I get confused about it. Often people ask where I'm from, and it's like, is it Britain? Is it UK? Is it England? They're all the same, but not the same. There it is. So we now have this spread across 21 countries, 21 hospitals. What's the advantage? Now, if you do an audit, we divide it into 4 aspects. First, you need to create an audit. Next, you need to collect the data. Next, you need to analyze the data. And depending on the data, you need to intervene. What we have done here is, we said, don't design them. We will give you everything designed. It's a ready-made recipe. So you reduce 25% of work. You just collect the data. You don't have to analyze the data because we will analyze and give it to you. And the concept is simple. You analyze for one hospital, you analyze for 20 hospitals, you take the same time. It's just a click of a button. And it's the same concept of cooking. You cook for one person, or if you cook for 10 person, when you're cooking rice, it will take the same amount of time. It will not change the time. So again, you're reducing 25% time. So the whole idea now is, you just collect the data, every 3 months we give the feedback. So you actually can do what is needed, intervene based on the data. That's the whole concept of decoding. How does the feedback look like? This is what every hospital which is part of DEKODE gets every 3 months. The top table will be the average of all the data that we've got, and the bottom will be for their hospital. And it will come as trends for 3 monthly intervals for a year. And then start seeing what's happening. We also give them a graph of all the 9 parameters we talked about. The dotted lines will be the median of all the participating hospitals' data, and then the solid line will be for their hospital. What you see here is none of the graphs or none of the tables have any names of which hospitals come from. So even if somebody accidentally gets one of this, as a matter of fact, I don't even know which hospital this belongs to. I've been using it for so long. I can't predict. So unless you share and say this is my hospital data, even I can't recognize which hospital data this is. And that's important because we are not here in the business of comparing hospitals. That's not the goal. Because every hospital is unique. Every hospital has a different set of doctors, different set of nurses, different set of resources. So you can't compare hospitals. But what you can do is, are you doing similar to a group of other hospitals? Are you doing better than them, or are you doing worse than them? In this case, this hospital seems to have lesser decay duration compared to the average, which is good. However, they seem to have the patients admitted for a much longer time compared to the rest of the participating hospitals. So that's an interesting aspect. They seem to be doing really well with the fixed rate, but underfilling the patients. Similar glucose monitoring and slightly better treatment monitoring. But what you see here is the proportion of patients who actually got the care as per the guidelines is about 90% here, 30%, 40%, and around 30%. So about 70% of the patients are still not getting the right care. And then comes the complications. I'm not going to go through in detail about this, but the whole aspect is the stakeholder looks at this and like, okay, this is what's happening in my hospital. I'm not able to fix everything, but let me focus on one thing and start working on that. That's the whole concept of focusing on this. And then comes sharing best practices, and that's where it comes into play. So here's an example. This was one of the hospitals which was doing about 60% ketone monitoring. A few other hospitals joined, and they were doing about 10 to 15% ketone monitoring. The guidelines is every year you should check ketones. Why check ketones? If you don't know if the body has stopped ketone production, acidosis will continue to continue. So you don't know if the treatment is working. So you need to check it every year. Adjust the guidelines, adjust the treatment depending on the results. This hospital shared what they were doing with the other hospitals. Said, oh, you know what, in our hospital we're using this machine, we're using this system, or we're using this to improve the care. The other hospital picked it up and the care improved. And what's improved, interesting, is those hospitals which were underperforming, they went beyond what the other hospital was doing and now they're doing better. But what you say is overall care for all hospitals improved. The other thing I am very fascinated about this is now, everyone tries to meet the median. So that is important because now what it means is a person can go to DKA to any of these hospitals and can expect similar care. That's what we're aiming for. It should not be a lottery. It should not be because they come to Emory University, get a good care compared to another hospital. Any place they go, they should get the same care. That's the whole concept of negating the variation in care.
So in the previous slide, like, why is it about going above 100?
This is interesting. So some of the hospitals were doing way more than recommended monitoring, and particularly in glucose, there was like lots and lots of duplication. And when we provided some feedback and said, well, you're doing too much, it was important because again, that's resources. Decide, oh, you know what, they get the glucose checked in their APG. They also get capillary glucose monitoring. They also get lab. It's like, why are we repeating 3 times? So that's the whole concept. So we gave them feedback on that one, and they were able to reduce that. Now, often people ask, why don't I just do a local audit? Again, first thing, the impact at patient from the data. As I said, there are 4 aspects. So it takes about, on an average, 3 to 4 months to get the audit up and running. Maybe another 3 to 4 months to collect the data, being very optimistic. Maybe another couple of months to analyze data, find a slot to present data. It's about a year now by the time you present data. And the first feedback you get is, and this is real life experience when I first presented this data is 1 year old. Things are different now. There's no proof to to either agree with it or disagree with it, but the first thing it says things are different. How? Why? I don't know. Next comes duplication of generic steps. Like every hospital has to do an audit, so why do you have to have separate audits for every hospital? Every hospital has to analyze. Why does every hospital have to spend time analyzing it if you can do it in one go? And last is the third aspect is lack of sustainability. Now that's important because one of the hospitals might be doing really well and get the audit up and running and everything is running good, but usually that is dependent on the people or the team that's running it. And if in the UK, most of this are run by residents who migrate or rotate every year, and when they move, nobody's there to pick it up. So again, whatever they have done is gone again. And lastly, sharing now, because if everybody does their own thing, something might work in your hospital. We don't know if that will work in the other hospital because we have very different ways of measuring it. So that's where the whole concept of DEKODE comes into play. So one, we are able to overcome the delay because you get feedbacks every 3 months. You can say this is as old as the last 3 months. So people can't say this is an old data. You are reducing 50% of the work you're doing. Sustainable because we have now got this program running in 25 hospitals sustained more than 3-4 years. And then there's a lot of scope for shared learning, and I'll show you some of the examples in a moment. And I like this graph, cartoon. It's about building a raft when you're stuck in an island. And first, if you're not given a space, which is important to having a data collection form, you do whatever you do, then there's no funding, and that's a very important thing. Often audits don't come with any funding. Then there's no quality assurance. And this is where the comparison with the rest of the hospital come into play. So you think you're doing great, but you don't know if you're doing great or not if you compare yourself. There's no market research. So again, if you don't know what others are doing to improve the care, you have no idea what is happening. And then comes the deadline. So if you don't have every 3 months feedback, you'll not be able to make improvement. And lastly is the no demand. And this is something I always struggled in our hospital. It's like, why do you want to do what DEKODE? It's like, well, how do I know if there is a variation? It's like, there's no variation in care, but how do you know? There's no way to compute. So this is where DEKODE comes into play. What DEKODE does is, it takes your data, we sort it, we arrange it, we present it and give you the story behind what's happening in your hospital in the last 1 year as a trend, saying this was improved, this came down, this way changed. This is where the whole DEKODE comes into play. So that's what's happening in the front end. Now comes the back end. In the back end, we spend a lot of time doing advanced analysis. First thing we go is, can this go beyond just providing feedback and going to research? First thing was, we were able to see what was the effect of COVID. This is a good real life example for us. So when COVID happened, almost every guideline was changed to accommodate for COVID. We held our guns and we said, you know what? Why don't we look at our data for the last 3 months and see if it needs to be changed? There was no need for it to be changed. And we gave the feedback and we stuck to our guns and we were right. There was no need to change the guidelines because DKA in a person affected with COVID to somebody who is not affected with COVID is exactly the same, no difference at all, unless you have not followed the guidelines. Then came the whole aspect of, is there a difference between a person having DKA if they have type 1 diabetes to type 2 diabetes? Now, often this is still a bugbear for me. In our medical school, whenever we ask medical students who gets DKA, they say people with type 2 diabetes. Nearly a third of our DKAs are happening in type 2 diabetes, and now we are having a whole new cohort, and I'll show you in a moment, of people who are having cancer therapy, especially the immune checkpoint inhibitors. Patients come in, they don't know what's happening, they treat them as metabolic acidosis, they are not figuring out what's happening. We were able to provide this feedback and said that the results for type 1 versus type 2 is exactly the same, so you don't need to have two separate guidelines, you need to have the same guideline which is followed. Perhaps this is the biggest advantage we've had with DEKODE. We were able to figure out what is leading to DEKODE. This is another lesson I teach all my students, saying TK is not a diagnosis, standalone diagnosis. It's a complication of a diagnosis. If you don't figure out what led to DKA, the patient will keep coming back. You might fix him 100 times, he'll come back 101st time with the same condition. So you need to figure out what led to DKA, and then we were able to pinpoint. And what you also see here is a changing trend over years. The top three still remains the same, and what's interesting is that the unclear, and that's still quite interesting because they're not figuring out what's happening, what's causing the decay. But then the last 4, you're now having newer types of DKA such as SGLT2 inhibitor associated DKA, immunotherapy associated DKA, other drug-induced DKAs. We've recently had somebody who had DKA from a biologic, which is the first time we've ever seen. And we don't know if it's association or the causation, we're still working on that one. And then the COVID. Then comes the whole aspect saying, okay, is there a difference if a person gets DKA, why is there on? First question, do people on pump get DKA? Maybe, may not be, we don't know, maybe it's a one-off. It wasn't a one-off. We had over 100 episodes that we've seen in the last 2 years in our hospital, in our DEKODE cohort, and that's important because 100 is a lot. So we were able to say, okay, this is the estimated incidence, and these are estimated because not every hospital is participating in our program. So based on our data, we say, okay, this is an estimated incidence of DKA in a person on pump, and that's important because if we don't educate them, they'll think, oh, I've now got a magic fix, I don't need to worry about anything, so they'll go away. So that's important. The next thing is, should we manage the DKA happening on pump similar to the way without a pump? We don't know. We were able to show that recent data. And they said that a person with on a pump had much lower DKA duration and much lesser length of stay. And that's again another important lesson. So what is that we're doing for a person with pump that we are not doing for a person without a pump, leading to longer length of stay? Again, lessons can be learned both ways. So lots and lots of opportunity for us to explore the data to understand more on what's happening in this. Now, how do we apply the DEKODE model to the DEI? First, dissemination. So first concept, this is what I was talking about. We've done away with the whole 20-page guidance. We have completely taken it out and we said, okay, this is what you need to follow. One page, just one page. Here's what you need to do, and we've broken it down. We've color coded it and particularly highlighted. And we use that yellow box, and our guidelines is probably now version 12 in the last 6 years. We change every 6 months because we look at our data and then we use that yellow box particularly to highlight this is what's changing or going worse in the last 6 months. We need to focus on. Every 6 months we upgrade, and now almost every department that's involved in our in DKA management knows this. That yellow box means that something, those are the aspects that are not done well. So they focus on it and make sure they do it. And that's important because we are not only telling them what to do, we also tell them what you've been making worse. There's a scan code which takes them to YouTube because that's again important because some people are visual learners. They want to look at a chart and they want to look at it. Some people are more audio learners. Some people prefer to use videos. And that's a very important thing because the newer generation of doctors we are seeing have grown up with Instagram and TikToks and Snapchats. They want to visualize things. They don't want to look at real. I can't remember the last time our medical students have gone to a library to read something. They always like to sit on the laptop and listen to something or watch something. So we've now created one. Now this is the guidelines. This is a 3-minute video that we created based on our national guidelines, which are very similar to the new guidelines that come out. Again, this was changed very recently too. I'm not going to play the full video. I'm going to let it play for about a minute. The whole concept is there's a patient coming with the DKA, and let's say on Saturday 2 in the morning, there's another 6 or 7 emergencies, all the senior doctors are busy. The junior most resident is asked to manage this. He doesn't have time to go back and brush up his whole concept of DKA. All he has to do is open and scan this and then watch it for 3 minutes. It tells him what he needs to do, keep the patient safe for the next 6 or 7 hours. That's what we need. We need to keep the patient safe and follow guidance. So it takes them through every step for about 3 minutes in the episode. How do you get this level? So like this is toxic for us because I can't go back and figure out what I need to do. Now, this is something that we create through a concept called CoMICs. Now, again, that's a talk by itself. Our channel has over 3.5 million views over the last 4 years. And it's accessed in nearly 180 countries. Next comes education. So that was dissemination. Next comes education. Education, we've now created this series called as Acute Diabetes SIMBA. So SIMBA is another project we work on. It stands for Simulation via Instant Messaging Birmingham at once, and it's an interesting concept. So the whole idea is every doctor who participates will be put through to various scenarios to solve cases. And it's built on rigorous medical education theories such as called experiential learning theory, participation action research, so on and so forth. We've published enough about it to prove that this works. And not only works, it improves the confidence of the person who's participating in it. We were able to show it sustained during COVID and beyond. Not only that, this whole concept is run. All the videos that we have done, over 250 videos, and we've run over 50 SIMBA sessions, were all run by medical students and junior doctors. And what is helping them is they are building their leadership, teamwork skills, understanding how to do evidence-based medical practice. Then comes implementation. The whole aspect of implementation is good. Now, one of the things we have picked up here is we seem to be doing reasonably well when the patient comes in. We get the diagnosis right, we get the treatment right. Then something happens between 3 and 10 hours. I have no idea what happens between then. Everything was chaotic. At 10 hours, when the consultant comes for post-take, they try and fix everything. So the whole aspect between that 3 to 10 hours has to be fixed. So we've now come up with this checklist, which now goes with the patient. So at 3, 5, 9, and 13 hours, to take, have you done this? Have you done this? Have you done this? It's almost like a prompt for them. And every hospital has its own way to do it. In our hospital, this sheet stays with the junior doctor or the resident who has admitted the patient. So he has to go back and check in the respective times to see if this has happened. And we call it as a nudge theory. There are various theories in implementation science to make people follow the guidelines. Now we're talking about the whole concept of this project was to show about where medical students, nurses, and junior doctors come into play. As I said, we've now got over 250 videos with 3.5 million views. We've now got 50 SIMBA sessions run over the last 4 years, 5 years coming. Everything was run by medical students and junior doctors. Literally everything. And right now, just for DEKODE, we have over 100 medical students, nurses, and junior doctors who work with each other. They are incredible teams. So it's just the way they work between each other to try and get things done. And one of the things I've learned is there is knowledge impartition and then there's peer-to-peer learning. And it's very different. The way I teach them and the way they teach between themselves is different. And often the most common example I give is, this is me opening up, is I would have gone to the whole year of our medical school where I would have heard lectures and talks and seen cases and everything. But the 10 minutes of coaching I get from my colleague, just if I go to my exam, is what helped me pass exams rather than listening to the whole thing. And that's exactly what I've seen with the doctors. You have told them everything, but then they use something different. They use a very different slang, different way of talking, different words, and they understand between each other and they get things done. And I think that's the power of the teamwork they're working on. The team, we've been working since 2014, but we started working with other hospitals from 2019. It started with a group of 12. As you see, except me, almost everyone were medical students. It then grew, and then now we have over 100 plus doctors spread over 20 countries, 20 hospitals who work with each other. There's a WhatsApp group, and my WhatsApp group goes every 2 or 3 minutes. It goes off. Somebody will ask a question, another person will answer. Often they don't even come to me anymore. They sort it out between themselves, and that's very important because we are not just creating a system. We want to create a system where we provide an opportunity for future leaders to develop. We also have a lot of fun. We go and present in various conferences. We go out for a meal. My bosses always tease me, like, yours is the only group which is over 200, 250 people who are not paid and they only work for food and travel. That's what we do. And we also go out, play with animals and everything, but the whole concept is keep it simple, work with each other, get things done. And the mantra I have is, it's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission. Just go do it. You'll figure out everything else later. It's very easy. Now, where do we go from this? So first thing is, we've now made it work at a local level, we spread it regional level, and now we've got it running at a national level. We think DEKODE has the potential to go international. We've been working with Priya on this one to get Emily on board, and hopefully we should be able to start collecting data soon. There are some aspects that we have to work on, but I think we're almost there. The model is so generic. It's not just for DKA. We've now duplicated for HS and very recently for hypoglycemia. And that's important to know because it took us about 7 years to build the DKA model. It took us about 6 months to duplicate it for HS. It took us 2 weeks to duplicate it for hypoglycemia. Once you've got the system right, it just takes very little time to get this up and running. So, what if you're interested to join DEKODE? It's a very, very simple process. First, you'll have a virtual meeting. Just drop us an email, we'll arrange a virtual meeting. We'll explain what DEKODE is. We'll give you an information pack so you can register as an audit in your hospital. You introduce your junior doctors, your residents to our team, because I know every consultant is busy, everybody's busy, nobody has time. You just introduce your doctors to us. We will provide them the induction and training, how to collect the data, where to do and everything. We'll provide them constant supervision. As I said, we have a WhatsApp group, which is now more than 200 members. It's almost like a virtual call center. If you have a question, you just put it there, somebody will immediately reply. And it's not just that they are all based in UK. We now got junior doctors based in about 11 countries in 3 continents. So 24 hours, somebody's awake, somebody will help you answer the questions. It's always up and running. And I've spoken for about, what, a good 40 minutes now? Yeah, 40 minutes. If I haven't convinced you enough in the last 40 minutes, here's a 2-minute video which was done by one of our medical students explaining DEKODE. And I found it fascinating because I give 40-45 minutes lectures and they do things.
Diabetic ketoacidosis, or DKA, is a life-threatening complication and is one of the most common reasons for acute hospitalization in people with diabetes. Each year, there are thousands more cases of DKA compared to the previous year, increasing costs by more than 10 million year by year. Our previous work showed that there is significant variation in patient care, and routine audits have not been able to reduce this variation. However, our quality improvement project sustainably improved through regular feedback on key performances of DKA management with stakeholders. Building on the success, we started an initiative called DEKODE, which can provide feedback on DKA care regularly using existing resources to participating hospitals. The model simplifies data collection, centralizes analysis, and provides an opportunity to identify and share best practices. So, instead of everyone doing an independent audit of their services, we invite them to join and contribute to DEKODE to have a win-win-win strategy. A win for the local hospitals, as they don't have to spend time designing an audit or analysing it. A win at a national level, as the data from all hospitals can help understand the changing trends in DKA care and use this information to inform future guidelines. And most importantly, a win for the patient with reduced variation in the care that they receive. Eventually, this information can also help us identify factors that cause DKA and prevent DKA in the future. The DEKODE model is very similar to the aviation industry, where sharing data on various experiences can prevent accidents and improve efficiency. With the regional success of the DEKODE model, we wish to expand this nationally. If you are interested to join DEKODE, please scan this QR code for more information.
So they do better work in 2 minutes than what I do in 45 minutes. Now with that, I thank again Priya and Queen's University for the opportunity to talk about our DEKODE work, and I look forward to collaborating with you and working on this in the near future. Thank you very much.